Hi, everyone. A warm welcome to our speakers and our audience on the YouTube Live. My name is Afra. I will be your host today. Our dialogue aims to facilitate dialogue on a whole range of social issues. We stand for democracy, human rights, equality, and freedom of speech. At Air Dialogue, we understand dialogue to involve speakers and our audience on the YouTube Live. My name is Hi, everyone. A warm welcome to our speakers and our audience on the YouTube Live. My name is Afra. Sorry about that. That was me. So at Air Dialogue, we understand dialogue to involve meaningful interaction and exchange between people of different groups who come together through various kinds of conversations or activities to increase understanding. Today's panel discussion is about graduating to employment. This panel will focus on developing a productive dialogue between HR professionals, civil servants, non-governmental organizations, students, and recent graduates. As an organization, we, with a strong focus on two-way communication, we want to ensure that students of social change, public policy, peace studies, and international relations get a better idea of how to land a first job, how, when, where to apply, and how to persevere in the face of difficulties and constant rejections. In particular, we will talk about where to apply for relevant jobs, how to fill out applications, prepare for interviews, how to get relevant work experience through internship, volunteering, community involvement, where to look for useful advice and or help. We are honored to have four speakers joining us who will share their insights on this matter. There are mainly three sections to this panel. First, each panelist will share insights for 10 minutes. After the speech, panelists could ask each other questions according to the speech content. Then it's the Q&A section when we select questions from the audience. The panel will last for an hour in total. If you hope to hear from us, you're welcome to subscribe to our channel and feel free to ask questions or make comments through the YouTube live chat. With this, I would like to give the mic to Mary McCarthy, who is Careers Advisor at the UCC Career Services. Stage is yours, Mary.
Hi, thanks, Afra. Got a bit daunted there when I heard my 10-minute speech. I don't really have a speech. I have made some, I'm very happy to go with the flow, and I've obviously done some research and preparation, so I'll start with that. I suppose first, just to set the scene in terms of my experience, from my experience of working with students, I'm working with undergraduate and postgraduate students at every level for 22 years. And I guess the disciplines in particular in UCC would be, we would have a number of students who are studying law, arts and humanities students, particularly in the area of maybe history, politics, sociology, and so on. And we also have a government and political science degree, and we have an international development degree, and we have, social sciences. So I guess it's kind of that cohort, and, many subjects within arts and humanities, such as European studies and that. And I guess this would really be the cluster of disciplines where I would encounter, working with and supporting and facilitating students to build careers in these areas. I guess from my experience, being very honest, I think it's an underdeveloped and it's a kind of a neglected area on campus across all universities. There tends to be, and it's an area that I really strive to put more of a spotlight on. And I am really interested kind of on a national level at looking at what we can do to really encourage graduates and undergraduates to consider careers across kind of public sector, public policy, NGO, not-for-profit areas, both nationally and internationally and European level. And I think it's something I'd be really excited to really have more conversations with people across a range of career services and maybe nationally to look at how we could maybe create both national and localized career events for our students. So at the moment, we don't, I guess in UCC, have one specific event dedicated to this area. It was actually on my kind of bucket list this year, and it didn't really happen. And but it's an area that for me, in terms of my own values and interests, would be the area that I'd be most passionate about. I guess, what do we do? So the first question, where to apply for relevant jobs? Well, I mean, I can go through a whole list, and I'm very happy to send you on a list of relevant sources of information. But I guess, first of all, at undergrad level, how do I encourage, and what's a useful way to encourage students both to get skills that will enable them to be more employable and kind of accelerate and build the stepping stones to careers in this area. And, you know, what kind of things can we do for them? For me, there are two things. You know, at least twice a year, I deliver a workshop and talk on really encouraging students to volunteer. Okay, so that's across every area. So I present them with the benefits of volunteering. You know, I get them to kind of think about their own values and interests and how they might identify areas, you know, that would really for them would be priorities where they could maybe gather some experience and volunteer, and then how to go about that. And I give them a lot of different, I suppose, sources of information where they can do that. So that's just on a first basic level. And those kind of things would be, you know, kind of Volunteer Cork, Volunteer Ireland, Active Link, you know, areas like that. And, you know, looking at kind of local community level and, you know, club and society level as well in on campus. And I suppose coupled with that, something that I think is very valuable and I do encourage students to do is to look at the, you know, the competency framework, say the public sector, public jobs, say .ie, competency framework and the EU competency framework. And actually recently I was looking at the UN competencies that they earmark. I was doing some work with the kind of food security masters. And I think a crucial thing is for them to kind of, is to encourage all of you as students to really focus on the kind of competencies that will be really valuable and will really add to your skill set and enable you to kind of accelerate and maybe optimize your opportunities to get valuable internships. So in terms of, say, just looking at the EU one, I've some of them in front of me, like analysing and problem solving, communication, delivering quality and results, learning and development, prioritising and organising, working with others, etc. You know, and these kind of skills go across all sectors. But I think it's particularly useful for them to in a mindful way, look at how they can maybe develop some, focus on some of those competencies and develop them. In terms of, you know, areas are, you know, I guess sources of information where I encourage people to both look for internships and ultimately jobs are, you know, there's no fast track into careers in this area. There are a series of stepping stones, which ideally might start out with an interesting internship at undergrad level or maybe at postgrad level. You know, there may be one or two internships, there may be a postgraduate master's, there may be an entry-level position, there may be some volunteering, and then they're probably at a position to step into maybe, you know, to then go forward for you know, a sought-after salaried role as a starting point. But, you know, in terms of things, I mean, European movement and Euractiv are particularly useful sources of information, I think, to look across a whole range of areas, but European movement, and I suppose linked to that, Euractiv and another one, Eurodesk.eu, have internships. And that would be a really good kind of, I suppose, resource, those three sources of information to help people look at opportunities. Public jobs, I think there's a huge, I suppose, lack here in, you know, there's a great possibility here to formally streamline and look at creating undergraduate and postgraduate internships across all areas in terms of public sector roles. I know, like the Department of Foreign Affairs have, you know, some internships or have had in the past, but it's an underdeveloped area and it's something that I would really like to see develop. Other sources of information where I would point students in the direction of are like wheel.ie and Far Purpose. And I'm actually have made contact with them recently and I'm going to invite them to try and interact more with us in UCC. So farpurpose.ie, you know, the focus is on developing, you know, graduate programs in the not-for-profit area across a whole range of sectors and roles and types of work. And I think that shows a lot of promise and potential in how that can really, you know, I suppose, you know, develop further opportunities for students. I mean, other kind of opportunities or sources of information I use are the 2 into 3. It's really a not-for-profit kind of graduate program, and there are some jobs there as well. And then Charity Careers Recruitment and Charities Institute Ireland. One source of of a wide, multi kind of, I suppose, I'm stuck for a word, but really valuable information. I don't know if you've come across it, 80,000 hours. And 80,000 hours is UK based, and it is encouraging people to explore, work of value, careers of value, what needs to be done in the world, to get in touch with a career development plan. There's a podcast, there are career stories. It's just a Pandora's box, really, and I would really love to see, more of, the opportunities linked to Ireland, come in under something like that. But it's a really good model. And I guess it's on the basis of 80,000 hours that I was hoping to develop a career event. It's too late this year to do it, but it's something that I certainly would like to do next year. I'm happy to I'm probably happier and at my best when I'm taking questions and interacting with students, but they're just some of the things that that I do, and that myself and my colleagues do to encourage students, and to kind of more encourage them, first of all, to look at acquiring competencies, I suppose, in summary, where they can look for jobs, first of all, at a voluntary level, and where they can look at jobs at a later stage. They're just some of the resources that I use, among probably many others. And then really encouraging students to look and be aware of the kind of competencies that are really, and to come up with a composite list, and maybe start to focus on a couple of those year by year, and how to kind of leverage the best out of each year to build really a portfolio of experience, insight, helps them develop more career clarity and actually be more employable in this area. I guess another thing I do is, I suppose postgraduate study can be quite an expensive business in Ireland, and there's very little financial support for students who may need it for postgrad study. So another thing that I have done in the past, and I do quite a bit, is to look at more affordable methods of study through studying in mainland Europe, looking at relevant masters that may really enhance their opportunities. And failing that, trying to be very innovative and inventive, and looking at a whole range of micro credentials maybe that they can acquire through online learning very cheaply, or in some cases even without a cost, while they are actually maybe planning a year after they graduate, where they're planning a year of maybe volunteering, gaining some insight if necessary, having a part-time job. I'm a very practical person. I say maybe you're going to earn some money and look at maybe 2 or 3 unpaid areas where you can get some work or training. There's so many opportunities through a lot of the resources I've mentioned, particularly things like ActiveLink, and maybe look at affordable ways of adding more skill and then stepping on to the next step. It's a stepping stone, piece by piece, stepping stone to kind of building your career, what I call sort of careering towards your future and building it at the same time. In terms of kind of filling out application forms and preparing for interviews, I think anyone who's a registered student in any kind of third level institution is going to have a lot of support for doing that. So sometimes I will give customized classes and workshops, like I was just talking about the Masters in Food Security actually last week, or the International Development degree. I would have done that, where really helping them make personal statements, letters of motivation, make really effective applications, and build up a really good CV. And often that kind of nudges students to think about, oh, there are some maybe gaps on my CV. What could I do this year? Or is there one thing I could do this year or next year? And then, we have a whole range of digital resources, both in terms of recorded webinars, workshops, talks. We actually now have a kind of AI, artificial intelligence, sort of digital tools that help people review, create a really good CV and review it. It's not perfect. It's a digital tool, but it really helps them get it to a stage where maybe we can work with them then to polish it up. And there's even something we call the big interview, where they can actually practice interviews and input, a series of questions where they can get to practice. But you can't beat the one-to-one. So we work in groups and one-to-one to helping people prepare for interviews as well. I'm just wondering, so they're really, okay. Some ideas I have that I'd really be interested in discussing, like there's a really good model, when, over the last few years, there's an absolute policy where, where I suppose Ireland, in terms of working in the EU, there's a real shortage now of Irish people, and there's a huge encouragement to graduates and postgrads to think of careers, which, you know, is a long path usually to get to a point where there's a permanent position. But like what was done in the last few years, our career ambassadors, EU career ambassadors roles were developed. And actually I was instrumental in kind of trying to bring that out of Dublin and national, you know, bring it to every university, because it started out in Dublin and we have career ambassadors in the UCC. And I think some kind of model where there may be, it's just worth exploring how to really just on a national level and then on a local level, really develop far more in terms of career events where maybe past alumni are coming back and talking, sharing their experiences. Maybe organizations are coming together to create an event. It may be an online event like this, really encouraging students to really consider careers in this area and giving advice on how on the kind of steps they can take. I just think it really needs to be more and more in the spotlight. I think the public sector and anything in the not-for-profit sector, or, you know, what I would call generally the public sector, you know, whether it's nationally or at a European level, I think we're missing out on some really good students, you know. I just think there's not enough happening. So I've probably, you know, the other question of you know, where to look for useful advice and help, I guess in some ways, some of the things I was talking about earlier, they are the resources really. There are lots of information. There's lots of information. We also have a lot on our website too, that links in with a lot of what I've said. And so it's really about, I think the key thing is getting more of a message out there and creating more events that actually, you know, really stimulate students thinking, students who might be a bit lost and really not really knowing how to even get started in areas like this. That's probably what I have to say, probably at this stage for now, but I'm really happy to participate in a discussion and maybe respond to questions.
Thank you so much.
Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the best practices and tips and tricks, which will be really helpful for students during the job hunt. And we will definitely come back with the questions here. I would like to introduce our second speaker, Amy Miller, who is the Public Affairs and Advocacy Manager at American Chamber of Commerce in Ireland. Stage is yours, Amy.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through some stages of my career to date and talk about some key learnings that I had, not only from applying for my first job, but as you'll see from my career, I've made a number of pivots over time. So I'm going to talk through some key learnings that have come from those job changes, as well as some of the really important pieces from finding my first job in the industry in the first place. So to begin, I was an undergraduate in law. I initially came into a law international program, and with all of the surety of an 18-year-old, I was going straight to The Hague. There was no other choice. I was going to prosecute war criminals, and that was the plan. And in my undergraduate, I suppose I engaged in an awful lot of extracurriculars. You know, UCC has a really thriving clubs and societies scene, and I took full advantage. And through that, was really exposed to a lot of political clubs and societies in particular, and became quite involved in student union politics. And through that, I really kind of got the bug, as they say. Now, I was still very sure that I wanted to be in the international arena, but I felt that I might be more interested to do it from a public policy perspective and from a legal perspective. So I proceeded then to do a master's in international public policy and diplomacy, also in UCC. I suppose what really appealed to me about that master's, and it speaks to some of the things that Mary was saying there, was there's a very structured placement piece to that master's. And I suppose at that stage I was really keen to get stuck into that side of things, to really get started into working. And at that time, as I saw it, it was really the only structured master's at that time that really built in that practical experience, that internship experience, and that was hugely appealing. So through that master's, I proceeded to do a placement in Leinster House. I was very fortunate to work with a very talented TD who was a foreign affairs spokesperson at that time. Proceeded to do my placement there. continued on for some time after the placement as a researcher and a communication specialist. It was really around the time that social media was becoming quite prevalent in politics. Largely, I think we find it hard to imagine a world currently where it's not relevant, but it was really reaching peak around that time. And I suppose I had a lot of those skills, those competencies that you discussed there, Mary, in social media, and I saw an opportunity to offer services, and proceeded then to work on communications communications work then throughout the rest of the year. Through that then an opportunity arose to work in the opposition whip's office for the Dáil between 2016 and 2020, and I was very fortunate to get that opportunity. So that was my role between 2016 and 2020, was I was a manager in the opposition whip's office in Dáil Éireann. Generally speaking, you're looking there at strategic legislative management. It's real kind of politicking in its purest sense, and you're really at the centre of lawmaking in that situation. Then I proceeded to transition to government buildings for a brief period, but I think in quite a shock to my colleagues, decided to take a sort of a natural exit pathway at that point and actually diversified into the NGO sector, and worked in the NGO sector in the violence against women sector for a year and a half. And then about 2 months ago, I transitioned to the American Chamber of Commerce, which is a membership organization that represents the interests of the Irish operations of US companies. So as I said, you'll see a lot of diversity in my public affairs life so far. So I suppose, what are some of the key learnings that I took from that in terms of pursuing careers in this area? I suppose the first thing I would say is pursuing your passions. As I said, I was really heavily involved in the clubs and societies scene in UCC at that time. I really kind of pursued pretty much everything that appealed to me, everything from modeling UN to singing to drama. It was really very varied. And through that I really established some key passions that I said, this is really where I want to go with this, particularly because public policy can be challenging, as we know, not only pathways into it but pathways through different aspects of public policy. So that passion piece is really key, because in those really tricky moments, it's that passion that really stands to you. And I suppose what I found as well was that passion conveyed a certain confidence in me to pursue the second key learning that I have from that, which is to seize every opportunity that comes your way. When I think back on my career to date, there have been a lot of opportunities that have come to me from avenues that I mightn't really have expected. Pretty much any of the career changes that I just mentioned, some were very deliberate, but some really were just chance opportunities that came up that were really just too good to pass up. And they've led to this really, diverse career history that I've really benefited from and continue to benefit from. And I suppose the third thing I would say, which might sound slightly contradictory, but as I say, I've made a lot of different career changes, so I think it's this key one is probably very obvious, is I would really recommend to you to reserve the right to change your mind. I said to you when I was in first year in college, as far as I was concerned, there was only one pathway. I was going straight to the ICC. There was no two ways about it. And over the course of my time, particularly in college, and as I really got to know my own passions and my own strengths as well, my own professional strengths that little bit better, my perspective on what I saw as being the really important things in terms of choosing opportunities definitely changed, and is continuing to change. I'm sure will continue to change throughout my career, because while I completely hear a lot of what's being said about the fact that getting into public policy can be quite unstructured, and finding pathways to get in can be really challenging. But the other side of that is that there's so much diversity to the public policy sector. I mean, there really is a space for pretty much any interest you have. And that's the beauty of the public policy sector. And as I say, it's one of the things that I've really found throughout my career, is that diversity of opportunity is you'd be very hard pressed, I think, to find other sectors where you have that same kind of diversity of opportunity. Just this morning I was attending the Global Ireland Summit in Dublin Castle, and got an opportunity to meet with some really just incredible people from all across the civil service, from civil society, membership organizations like ours. And one thing that we kept commenting on, I found we were commenting on in pretty much every conversation, was how diverse the people were in the room, the diversity of background, the diversity of experience. And I suppose that's another thing I might suggest, a real kind of top tip, I suppose, that I had when I was pursuing different opportunities, particularly now when there's such a focus on online presence, you know, and particularly on that mentorship piece that was really very prominent in the private sector and is very much moving into the public sector a lot more now, is that piece about mentorship. So what I found at a couple of different junctures in my career was, you know, I might look up on LinkedIn maybe 2 or 3 key people who are in a role that I might like to do next, or maybe in 1 or 2 career moves time, and I'd have a little look at, you know, their backgrounds, you know, where have they come from, not necessarily to imitate, because I do think the pursuit of public policy is really quite specific to the individual, but just to get a feel for, you know, even some of those competencies that Mary had discussed, or even, you know, to get a feel for what are the different types of experiences that can mold somebody into a position that I might like to be in one day. So I suppose those are some of the key learnings and a couple of tips. I'm quite happy to answer questions on any of it.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you for actually sharing your personal experience. It's a great example for everyone, and also very encouraging, which students really need to during this period of time of job hunts. So thank you so much for that. Next, we have Deirdre, who is the UN Youth Delegate from Ireland. Stage is yours.
Thank you, Afra, and thanks for having me here today. I want to start by apologising because I've had bronchitis for the past 2 weeks and the cough is still there, so I'm going to be coughing throughout, unfortunately. So my name is Deandra. I'm 25 and a soon to be 3-time graduate of University College Cork, big UCC presence here tonight. I began my higher education with the BSc Government in 2015. I started the LLB in 2019, and I'm just finishing semester 2 as the same masters as Amy in the MSc International Public Policy and Diplomacy. I've been serving as Ireland's United Nations Youth Delegate since September 2021, and some of my interests include feminist international relations, peace and security, and human rights. So when I was asked to be part of this panel, I questioned whether I was the right person for it, because I have been in higher education for so long. I haven't tried to enter the job market as a political science graduate. And there were 3 main reasons really why I stayed in college. So number 1, I always wanted advanced degrees. I interned in the New York State Assembly during my undergrad, and I knew that I really needed an understanding and background in law to be able to understand the legislative process. Number 2, I've heard so many stories that as a woman, for your qualifications to be seen as equal to your male counterpart, you need to have more qualifications. And 3, which is the reason why I decided that I should share any advice on this panel, is because I was scared, and I still am. I'm going to be brutally honest here now in the hopes that it will help anyone who might be feeling the same. I basically just want to get the message across that if you are worried about your future, you're not alone. I've been asked quite a bit in the past few weeks what my plan is and what my next steps are, because if you look at my LinkedIn, I appear to have my life together. I'm involved in 500 different activities, speaking at different events, getting awards, and obviously objectively I look like I'm doing well. And don't get me wrong, like I'm very proud of all that I've achieved and I love being busy, but like in trying to figure things out, I took on a lot. And what you're not seeing online is me running right up until the midnight deadlines for assignments, or writing speeches up until the early hours of the morning, or my mother giving me eye cream saying you need this more than me. So that would be my first piece of advice, is try not to spread yourself too thin when you're trying to figure things out. You have to find out what your interests are. So whether you're going to just be reading about things or meeting with people working in those specific areas. And then you need to find activities that you can build your interpersonal and transferable skills around those interests with. And how I started doing this was by following organizations, companies, NGOs on LinkedIn, and then scrolling through my LinkedIn feed as if it were Twitter. And when you're scrolling, you're liking, you're commenting, you're sharing. You obviously don't have to do it all at once. It's just so that your name is being seen and that you're being seen to be engaging. And then you can start looking at the people who are doing the same, connect with them, follow them, start to grow your feed based off of their activity. And all of this will mean that the opportunities will be flooding into your feed. And I don't mean paid jobs. The majority of mine are unpaid voluntary activities, but there's so much value in them to build up the skills that you need to enter the job market. So what I do is I screenshot everything that I'm interested in. So if somebody puts up a certificate that they just recently finished a leadership course, or somebody liked an opportunity to be part of a youth advisory board, I screenshot all of those things and I put them into an Excel sheet at the end of every week. I've been doing it for about 4 years now, and I would not have heard of half of the things that I've been involved in if I hadn't done this. Once they're in the Excel sheet, then I start researching what the opportunity is about, you know, the eligibility criteria, deadlines, durations, and then I color code depending on whether I should apply soon, whether I've missed a deadline, or whether I want to apply at all. I also include the link to the application forms just to save myself from going back to look everything up again. Now, I know color-coded spreadsheets are not going to be for everyone. And obviously, we've spoken about clubs and societies in college already. So if you're happy with them, like, this might not be for you either. But my second piece of advice is to step out of that comfort zone. And I know that it might seem counterintuitive because it could be taking a lot for you to be involved in what you're already involved in, whether, whether that's because of anxiety or commuting, but voluntary experience outside of college is a really good thing too, if you can get it. And customizing your LinkedIn feed to give you those opportunities is a good way of doing that. The best way of continuing it, though, of making sure that you see and hear about these opportunities, be they voluntary or internships, is networking. The dreaded networking. And I think it's a lot more difficult now than it was a few years ago because you have to stay relevant. I'm not saying that to discourage anyone. It's just something that I've noticed by not doing what I'm going to tell you to do and having other people do it to me and being like, oh, okay, yeah, that works. So a few years ago, you could have an unreal LinkedIn profile, and I'm sticking to LinkedIn just because it's the professional site. I would recommend having a professional Twitter as well and following news sources and political leaders, etc., just to show that you have that interest. And to have a professional online presence beyond LinkedIn, it is something that I know some recruiters look for. It's not a good thing for you to be a ghost. But yeah, it's not just about your LinkedIn profile anymore. With the way that we all like to big ourselves up on LinkedIn, everybody is doing a lot. So it is much more difficult to get somebody's attention through your headline alone just by connecting with them. You have to message them. You need to look at their profile, see what they've done, just like Amy was saying, see what you have in common and just reach out to them. Say like, hi, my name is blah. I'm delighted to connect with you because we have a common interest in peace and security. I was wondering if you would be available to chat about your career with me sometime. I would love to learn more about blah. And I know it can be scary. I haven't done it enough myself, to be honest, but really what's the worst they could say? No, or leave you on red. We've all been there. It's nothing. Like if you send 10 of those messages and you get 2 people coming back to you saying, absolutely, I have half an hour for a coffee chat next week on Zoom, then you have 2 people who you can learn from, whose brains you can pick, whose advice you can ask for. You shouldn't pass up an opportunity like that, because as you get older and the more advanced into your career that you get, like the opportunities don't come along nearly as often. People want to help. That's that's it at the end of the day. You should have your questions ready beforehand, not to berate the person with constant questions. Try to be as conversational as possible. Share relevant details about yourself, your interest, your experience, also as practice for interviews, because working those examples into your speech becomes a lot easier when you practice like this. And then after those meetings, send a message to the person thanking them for their time, saying 1 or 2 things that you learned, and that you'd be happy to keep in touch. And when you see that person posting, then you're liking, you're commenting, you're staying relevant. You're not reaching out every week looking for more advice. If you go to apply to their company or organization a few months later, absolutely reach out to them again. But other than that, stay relevant in that you're supporting them and keeping up what they're doing, like you're showing a real interest. You're then going to pop up on their feed much more, and your name might come up in conversation with someone who could give you another opportunity. Like it really is a ripple effect. You just have to put the time in. And realistically, you can be watching Netflix, scrolling through LinkedIn. There is no excuse. It's just, it's not that much effort for what you can get back from it. And we hear this all the time, but you have to be proactive. You have to do the grunt work of reaching out, being present, being seen, because the opportunities aren't just going to come to you. You have to make your own opportunities. So that would be my nuggets of knowledge. And I will leave it at that. But again, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for your genuine advice, Deidre. I can also share proudly that, when I heard your story, the majority of our Air Dialogue interns, volunteers have found a paid job afterwards. So we're missing them, but it's great to see that they're like developing the skills they really need to get hired with volunteering. I think that's a quite important point. Thank you so much for sharing. Now I would like to give the mic to Gabrielle, who's a policy advisor at the Permanent Representation of Ireland to OECD and UNESCO.
Thanks so much, Afra and Sophia and everyone else at Air Dialogue, and thanks for inviting me. And thanks also to everyone who's spoken so far. You've all given really, really insightful comments and perspectives, which is sort of annoying for me personally because it's a bit daunting now to follow. But yeah, I definitely don't have the career guidance professional background, and that Mary has, and Amy and Deandra had really interesting perspectives on sort of broader career direction and networking. And I don't think that I can give that insight to the same sort of extent. I can't do as good a job as you guys have. But what I do have, I suppose, in the context of this conversation is just some practical experience on what it's like to try and get into the job market after you've graduated from college with your humanities degree. So I'm just going to focus on that and sort of the practical tips that I have found helpful. Just to give you some very quick background about myself, I studied history and politics at undergraduate level. And I graduated in 2020, so into the pandemic, and I did an internship with European Movement Ireland for a few months before getting another internship at the Department of Foreign Affairs at the Permanent Representation of Ireland to the OECD and UNESCO, which is where I work now. And then after that, I went to Brussels for 7 months to do a traineeship with an MEP, which was a really fantastic experience. And then I came back to Paris to do the job that I have now as a policy advisor in the Perm Rep. And so yeah, I think I'm going to focus, like I was saying, just on sort of practical advice and the job application process. I think a lot of the advice that I'm going to be giving is from the perspective of an interest in sort of IR and politics and EU type fields. And I want to avoid falling into the trap where I just talk about myself and what worked for me. So I'm really going to try and sort of pass on advice that I've received that I have found really useful. I know how daunting and sort of sometimes demoralizing the process is, and I hope that maybe something I say is helpful or resonates a bit with someone. I think where I'd start, and this sort of, I know Deandra sort of touched on this a bit when she was discussing networking, but reaching out for help, I think, is really my number one piece of advice. I think when I think back on all the job applications that I've applied for, the whole way through, I asked for help at every single step of the way, whether it's, editing cover letters or interview prep and CVs, etc. I basically got other people to do like a lot of that work for me. So that's definitely like where I'd start with. It goes without saying that career guidance services are an excellent resource. And then on top of that, I think for me, friends who are a year or two older than you, or maybe are out in the job market already, can help you navigate that world and sort of figure out where you should apply and what paths people with similar interests take. I'd also ask people, this is sort of what I think has been touched on a few times, but people who have the internships or the jobs that you want. And if you just reach out to those people for help about, cover letters and knowledge about what the day-to-day competencies required for those jobs are, I think most people are fairly open to giving you some of their time if they're not too busy. Because everyone's gotten help, so everyone's willing to help. It's sort of a reassuring cycle that happens. Yeah, and so in terms of the applications and the cover letters, I think it is sort of, to a degree, it's kind of criminal how underprepared a lot of people who exit third level education are in terms of writing these applications, just because it doesn't really reflect your job performance. It's a completely separate skill set that's so important during someone's early career. And again, for me, getting help to write them, finding someone who really enjoys editing stuff and getting them to sort of look over your applications has been really, really helpful. A really good piece of advice I got from one of the people who helped me very early on in cover letters, and that's something that I've stuck with since, and sort of people who are part of the recruitment process have sort of said that this is really good advice. I'd actually be curious to hear what Mary thinks about this, is to sort of frame the cover letter or open the cover letter with a statement of ambition. And I don't think this is particularly original, but basically I've always framed my cover letters as, here's my ultimate career ambition. This is why the job that I'm applying for is the best way to help me get there. And also here's why I'm good at the job. So my cover letters have always kind of had, in that sense, fairly formulaic first sentences, which is something like, my ultimate ambition is to work in the, let's say I'm applying to an EU job. My ultimate ambition is to work in the EU, and I'm applying for this position as it represents a unique opportunity to take an invaluable step in that direction, or something like that. And in terms of the internship side of thing, again, I think reaching out to people and asking them for their competencies, you know, what actually happens in the day-to-day of the job. And then you can look back at your experience and find competencies that match those sort of skill sets, and you can give the examples in the interviews. I think that's a really useful piece of preparation to do. Mary spoke a bit about competencies in that sense, and it was really, really interesting. And I was speaking to someone recently who had a really fantastic career, and they advised me to always write down different tasks you do while you're in a job or while you're volunteering, sort of as you go. And that way, when it gets to the time when you have to apply or do interviews, you have a list that's sort of ready for you to take from, a list of examples of times you've dealt with different kinds of challenges. If it's an IR, an EU kind of job, they're probably going to ask for current affairs. So you should be reading up on the issue at the moment, and whether that's having a Twitter feed, like something that Deandra was talking about, or for example, if it's an interview in the EU sphere, you should be reading something like Politico Brussels Playbook for a few weeks before the interview, just because you'll fairly quickly then get a sense of the hot issues at the moment, and you'll be able to figure out what the sort of 2 or 3 sentence takes that everyone is repeating about those issues. And then when it comes to the interview, if you can show the interviewer that you kind of understand the opinions of the moment, it'll look really good. Also in interviews, I mean, for nerves personally, that's something that I really struggled with. I don't know, this might not apply to anyone listening in, but like I remember when I interviewed for European Movement Ireland, I literally stopped through one of my first sentences because I was so like panicky and nervous. And I think I got really good at, first of all, they were really nice about it, which is also, you know, a thing to keep in mind. Most people are really nice, but the piece of advice that I got was to sort of not overscript and focus on the content. And if you're trying to sort of form sentences as you go, a lot of the time, you know, it takes you're not worrying about how you present yourself. That was very helpful for me. And then the only exception to that, someone else gave me a great piece of advice, which is figure out your sort of opening sentence just to get you into it. On where to look for jobs, I actually am going to skip that section because I think Mary's covered that much better than I could. But maybe one thing I'd touch on before wrapping up is I have a lot of friends who have jobs in sort of fields that they're really, really interested in, and they've gone through completely different routes. So I'd be very sort of aware of stepping stone jobs where you can pick up a lot of these transferable skills. Because at the end of the day, everyone wants someone who can run their social media or organize events. These are really valuable skills, and they're really great paths in their own right as well. But just to be very conscious, I suppose, of the different, basically, maybe the note that I'll leave this on was something that someone said to me, that at this age, sort of all experience is really good experience. Nothing is a waste of time at all. It's all really valuable and it's all really helpful. And in that sense, no matter what you're doing, no matter what you're volunteering for, your internship or the stuff in college, you're learning at this age. Everything is a learning experience, so it's all very valuable. So yeah, I'm very happy to answer any questions if anyone has any, and yes, looking forward to the rest of this. And thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Gabriel, for the valuable best practices, especially for the cover letters and interviews. And I think cover letters are really like important component to get the interviews. So thank you for that. With this, I would like to allow our speakers to comment or ask questions to each other. So if you want to say something, comment or have questions, please unmute yourself.
I might actually come in here just because I sort of touched on it a bit there, because I was talking about cover letters and sort of interview sort of guidance stuff, and I'd be curious to hear Mary's insight into this. Like, how would you advise your students if they had questions about those topics?
You're on mute, Mary.
Thanks, Deandra. I was really impressed by what you said, Gabriel, about the cover letter, and part of me almost kind of stepped back and thought, oh, I'd nearly be afraid to say that to every student. But I think there's a real, I think in this sector, absolutely. You know, when you move into that kind of private sector and there are just, you know, waves of students, you know, applying to jobs, there's that thing where you're targeting and tweaking every message to kind of show that you know, and a lot of it is kind of waffle really, I suppose, but it's almost showing that, you know, I really, your values and your mission statement and blah, 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 really resonate with me. And you're trying to kind of target every single bit and show that you got some of the skills that they look for. But I think, and a lot in the private sector, I suppose that they're less, they're probably less interested if you're applying for, an entry level, a kind of a new position. You're saying, well, my career objective is kind of over here, but this is going to be really good for me to get there. That as a kind of a formulaic bit of advice would be something we wouldn't give. You're really, the absolute ideal scenario, and in every, and the more competitive, this is a much smaller cache of people, but it's also people who are really committed and have kind of values where it makes it competitive. And I guess, so some of those things apply that, I think there's more acceptance of saying, well, this is ultimately my goal, and this is a really good internship or place to be for the next 9 months. I think that's just far more acceptable. And that is the career route. Everything you've said is just so valuable, all three of you, every single piece. I'm just, as I'm hearing you, I'm thinking all the things I left out, but I think everything together that we have said is actually probably useful. In terms of interviews, it does, an interview is what I always call it. It's a very focused kind of dialogue. It is a dialogue, it is a conversation, but it has to be a particularly focused one. So, I give conflicting messages in a way, it has to be, you have to be what I call your natural best potential self, that's relevant to that organization and to what they're about. So it does take a lot of practice, I often tell people, almost imagine that you were, if you were given a script suddenly that you were an understudy for someone in a play or whatever, you stood up on stage, you would have really gone through that inside out. So you can just embody that part and be that person on stage. And in a way, it's not presenting a false persona, but you have 30 minutes or 40 minutes or whatever it is, and you do need to get that crucial information across. And the key thing is, you're really interested and committed, and you're interested in this area. You've got a whole range of bits and pieces of skills and experiences where you have actually acquired skills that will be relevant and useful, and you got to fit in little examples of that. And that does take, I'm almost sick of that acronym, the STAR technique: situation, task, action, result. But it is really about, was it you, Deandra said, or you, Gabriel, said, or you said, Gabriel, that somebody said to you, write down, when you're going through experiences. Absolutely. I think that bit of advice for anyone listening here, and the advice, Deandra, of, which is really super impressive. You could give a workshop on how to kind of be proactive in just collating and gathering, and kind of prioritizing your preferences and having all that organized. But I think they're the two things that are really needed in this area. So it's like everything you do, for a club, for society, for something out there in the community, whatever it is, whether it's through ChangeX or some local, and anything that you're doing, it's really important to bring that reflective bit into it, and even just devote a half an hour a week to sit down and say, what am I doing? What kind of skills was I using at that event, or organizing that, that speaker, or, whatever it might be. What skills was I using there? What was challenging about it? What have I achieved? How have I changed? What skills am I gaining? And so it's identifying, kind of, reflecting on activities, because when you're in the middle of an activity, you're busy living your life. So you have to set time aside consciously to think. One thing I find time and time again is there are a lot of people who get jobs because they have really done all the things I'm talking about. They've done the interview coaching. They can present examples, of skills and competencies and interest because it's practiced. And there are some people who are, probably would be an outstanding and more substantial kind of, maybe fit for that role, but they haven't done that. People have to hear it. You have to be able to communicate it. So there are people who've done that kind of prep and will get the role maybe over and above someone who's been less motivated, or they just think I'll do it my way, or they're too shy to kind of step into that. You have to be able to communicate it. So, and to be able to communicate it, you have to be aware of it. So the self-aware person is always at an advantage, applying for anything. Maybe I've gone a little bit too long there, but like, I think, and I suppose linked as well, maybe going off the point, Amy, you were talking about, get involved in everything, just be open to changing your mind. And, there's a great theory, or, it's not even a theory, it's a model of it based on kind of social learning theory in trying to understand careers in the world of kind of vocational psychology, called, it's almost like a contradiction in terms, it's called planned happenstance. But happenstance is about almost that thing of just being there in the moment, standing next to someone at a bus stop and you end up chatting, and next thing you've got an internship with them, or you're at a barbecue or whatever it is, like chance encounters. Now, networking, of course, sets a whole ecosystem where we can create a lot of that climate where we can network. But like, it's not being mercenary and strategic and kind of using people. It's getting the balance with being open. Like, there are certain qualities that really enhance, developing your career in any area. And with planned happenstance, it's curious, like thinking about your values and your interests and what it is that you're interested in. That's not being able to answer the whole big career question, what do I want to be when I grow up? We can keep asking ourselves that question. But what am I interested in now? What kind of things am I thinking about? What assignment did I do, or what bit of research or what module is really, has stayed with me? There's something that has sparked my interest. So thinking about what sparks your interest and your values and your interest. And then, from that to think about, to remove obstacles in a way, to constantly ask yourself, well, how can I find out more about that? To really nurture your curiosity and find out, how can I find out more about that? How can I maybe talk to someone or figure out how to maybe, just get a bit more insight into that, so follow your curiosity and say, how can I, rather than, oh, well, I can't because, no jobs in that area. So, and then kind of, be willing to follow up on any kind of contacts and, really be open and curious, and then follow up with some action steps. As you were saying, Deandra, just follow up with that, really interested to hear that. I, saw you on YouTube, or I heard this thing and I, really love to just find out more. That's following your curiosity and that openness, coupled with, what you were saying, Deandra and Amy, really opens up, opportunities. So rather thinking, how can I, rather than, well, it's hard and challenging, I can't, how can I went a bit off the point there, sorry, Gabriel.
No, that was really, really interesting. Thank you for giving such a good answer.
Thank you so much, Mary and Gabriel. Do we have any other questions or comments? If not, I think I'm conscious of time. I would like to move to the questions part, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I have one question for Mary from the audience. Let me read it here. So companies request job interviews for qualified and experienced architects and engineers. He's an architect himself, so it's about his experience. But there are problems such as the fact that companies do not sponsor these people in terms of visa, probably. That the people do not explain their rights correctly. What would be your advice in the HR interviews for these and similar situations?
Okay, I probably just need to clarify that question. Is this person outside of is not a European citizen? Maybe outside of the EU?
No,
okay.
Not a European citizen.
Yeah, and is applying for jobs.
And then they have to have get a sponsor. Yeah. So a company needs to be a sponsor for that person in order to get the visa.
No, okay. I probably need to clarify with some other questions, but I mean, I work with a lot of international students, and generally, okay, if this person is studying, maybe you could clarify if this person is currently on a course or has recently finished a course.
Yeah.
So obviously in terms of your stamp 2 visa, you are entitled then, once you get your actual results, not just when it finishes with your exams, but you're then, once you receive your results, and there's a question mark about receiving results and actually being conferred, but you are entitled then to apply. You don't need one company to sponsor you before you apply. You're entitled, if you're under the critical skills category, you know, which if kind of engineering is your background, you will be, you are then entitled automatically to apply for that work visa for 2 years and then apply for jobs. But you can, you know, it's a tricky one, because really, if you're waiting for the visa and for the paperwork, you can't apply for jobs too far in advance. So if you're in a position where maybe you're on a course right now and you're worried because you do want to remain in Ireland and work, applying for jobs that you may not be in a position to actually take up until maybe well into the autumn. It's actually having faith that once you get your visa, you can apply for jobs. But applying too far in advance, you could maybe send out some speculative nice application saying, I'm really interested in what you're doing. I've seen some of your projects or whatever. And, you know, I am, you know, qualified to work or eligible to work in Ireland for 2 years with eligibility to renew for another 2 years. And, you know, maybe who knows after that for even up to 7 years. But so it's really helpful. Like you need the visa before you can actually start work, but you don't need to get a company to sponsor you before you apply for the visa, unless you've got some other category or status that I'm not aware of. But generally for non-European citizens, that's the situation if you're studying here. And it's really helpful to put that on your make it really clear, because you'd just be amazed how many employers just don't understand this. And, you know, your category of visa, I presume it's stamped to, you know, eligible, you know, for employment for 2 years. And actually you can put that link down. It's there under the Department of Foreign Affairs, or, you know, you can actually, or you can get that link very easily. I'm sure you have that, but it makes it easier for them to see. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think like we don't have background information, so
No.
I think
Yeah.
in general, yes. Thank you so much.
Yes.
I have another question for Amy. What were some of the challenges you faced in building your career as politics graduate?
That's a really great question. So I think probably to deep dive a little bit more into some of the things I was talking about earlier about how, I suppose, diversity of opportunity in the public policy sector can be very exciting, but it can also be really daunting. I would say that's definitely probably one of the big challenges, is the fact that, you know, we talk about kind of politics and public policy, but there's so much to that. I mean, even if you think about it in terms of, you know, government structures, there are, you know, ex-government departments. The number I should know off the top of my head, I'm not sure. If I had to guess, I'd say it's probably maybe 12 or so. You know, so even think about that. Think about how all of those departments subdivide then into other departments, and that's just a governmental structure. You know, you're not even thinking about something like the UN, which is bigger again. So, you know, as I say, you have that diversity of opportunity, but also the sense of choice can also be really overwhelming. So I suppose that's why the first kind of key learning that I gave there was about pursuing passion, and twin that with that piece about reserving the right to change your mind, because, you know, what I would say is, you know, pursue your given passion at the time with all the vigor you have, because the fact of the matter is, you know, particularly in the public policy sector, because it can be so disjointed in terms of specific avenues into jobs, you know, not only is it daunting in terms of choice, but you can also be competing against a lot of other people. So what I would really say there in terms of overcoming that challenge is that I love that piece you said, Mary, about self-awareness, because it's definitely something I've come across throughout my whole career, has been one of the greatest strengths that I've seen other successful candidates have. It's something I've relied on an awful lot, is, you know, really being aware of where you have that value added. And, you know, sometimes I think, particularly for those of us in the public policy sector, you know, generally speaking, we're quite passionate people, we're very socially aware people, we can be very empathetic people, but then sometimes that process of self-awareness can be a little bit tricky. But it's so important. It's so important to be really aware and to have that confidence as well, to know where you're bringing what I call the kind of value added. And there's an extent to which that's kind of private sector terminology, but I do think there's actually more crossover in terms of the job application process between the private sector and the public sector, maybe than we give credit for. So that terminology, value added, I would always really think of it, because and without the risk of sounding too hokey, but each individual person brings a really specific set of skills and a really specific set of strengths, particularly now when we look at the kind of major values that are coming through, even in the private sector, corporate structures, public sector. You see a lot of these kind of social awareness pieces like sustainability, diversity, inclusion, gender equality. These are becoming really key priority pieces within corporate structures, and I use that word corporate very loosely. I suppose maybe governance structures is a better word, because you find it in the public sector too. So what I would really, really recommend is to have that confidence that your unique experience and your unique skill set has value, and to really reflect on where that value added piece is. I suppose a piece of advice that I always give to any number of colleagues, I've given it to colleagues, fellow students, all the way up to people, TDs and senators, is think about, if you were to have a conversation with somebody and then proceed to walk away, and that person struck up a conversation with someone else and was talking about what it was like to engage with you. What are, 3 characteristics that you'd like that person to say? Would you like them to say that, Amy Miller was, really professional, she was a great listener. I really felt that she understood, my policy area. And to think about those characteristics and to feature them in everything you do, because what I call them for people is they're your lenses. So they frame the words you use in your interview. They'll frame, the characteristics that you convey in your cover letters. They're things that you can practice in terms of your social skills when it comes to networking. So they're just 3 key words that you can keep in mind all the time. Not only will they kind of keep you really focused, but also they'll really help with that confidence piece, because there's a huge amount of science around the idea of affirmations. And I appreciate it's not necessarily quite the same as an affirmation, but there's an extent to which there's a piece about, if you really focus in on those 3 characteristics, it's about kind of almost speaking something into existence. And particularly if you're struggling with any kind of confidence piece, there's an extent to which it's, maybe you kind of fake it till you make it a little bit in terms of those characteristics. But the thing is, in the public policy sector, obviously the policy side, the kind of pure policy side, or the kind of academic policy side, is so important. But like other speakers have mentioned, there's a huge social aspect to it also. There's a huge piece to it that's about person-to-person relations. So that piece about having that kind of framework when it comes to characteristics, it's a really, really helpful tool, I think, in overcoming some of those challenges.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. There's just one thing I'd like to add that might be useful to you all in terms of that self-aware bit. When I get people to think about interviews or CVs or any experience they have, I think there are 3 there's a process, a 3-step process that really helps you think about it. What exactly did I do or am I doing? Describe every little itty bitty little small task that you do, because when you write everything down, then you see everything. It's like almost to imagine if you were training in someone else, to take on that role in whatever it is. So and that you had to let them know everything you do. So what do I do, or what did I do? And then the next step is, what skills am I using and did I use? And then the next step is linked to you reminded me of what you said there, Amy. What do I feel good about? What am I proud of in terms of what I've done? Have I been of some benefit? That's the value bit. Have I added some value or added something that has had some nice lasting impact? It could be something very small, but if you follow that pattern, it really helps you to kind of think about things. And I mean, one other just last thing, I know in UCC we have university-wide modules that are free, and you can do a 5-credit module. So like we have one on social justice. I was just trying to look it up there. Social justice, I think, I don't know, you might remember it, Deandra, but social justice, maybe diversity, global citizenship. There's another one on sustainability. There are about 4 or 5 of them. And possibly whatever students who are listening in today, if you're, if it's possible and you still have another year to go or whatever in university, maybe in your college, you also have these free university-wide modules that any student or member of staff can do. And sometimes these are very, very pertinent and relevant today. And something like that is another thing that can maybe enhance particularly in working in this area, in any of the areas we're talking about. Just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary, Amy. It was really insightful again. I think people are taking notes all the time. It's really like hands-on info that like they can use straight away tomorrow. So thank you so much
Thanks.
for all the insights. I'm
happy to send Afra on to email Sophia a list of all of the resources for kind of looking at jobs. I'm happy to email that on.
Yeah, that would be great. And I will be so guys, if you're like listening to us, if you're joining us today, you can email us at info@airdialogue.ie if you would like to receive Mary's advice. So please email us and we will make sure to send it on to you. Thank you, Mary, again. Thanks, Amy. I have another question for Gabriel. What organizations provide internship, entry-level jobs for students or graduates for social sciences?
I mean, I think largely this question, I'd refer you back to sort of the really great resources that Mary was discussing. I mean, for me, my go-tos, first of all, I was asking friends who sort of drew up their places of reference to look for new jobs. And I know Mary has a lot of resources that are probably better than my 22-year-old friend's resources. But in addition to that, especially what I found really, really useful, European Movement Ireland do a great, I think it's every Thursday they have a newsletter that's released that has a list of internships and jobs. And it's very, very good. And I think it draws largely from your actives list, which Mary also referred to. And that's also a very, very good place to go look for. And then on top of that, sort of going back to what I was saying about sort of, you know, the value of stepping stone positions, or maybe that's not a great term to use, but, you know, there's a lot of other, maybe it's slightly adjacent to where you'd like to end up, but there's a lot of other obviously entry-level jobs and fields that would allow you to pick up really, really good transferable skills that would then, you know, maybe the next time around you could apply for an internship you want if you weren't able to get it in your first attempt. So yeah, that would be sort of my brief answer to that question.
Thank you, Gabriel. Actually, I have so many questions here, but I am gonna tie it down and I'm going to ask the last question to Deirdre. How to network successfully in the world of politics?
Okay, so first thing would be have your interest areas and have those like 3 kind of sentences, like Gabriel was saying earlier about like the things that are happening, like current affairs. Have sentences to do with your interests. They will start conversations and then the person can like piggyback off of what you are saying. I would say LinkedIn is the best place to be networking and to be proactively messaging people. Like I said, again, if you're sending 10 messages, you're getting 2 people coming back saying, yes, absolutely, I'd love to meet you. That's brilliant. It's also trying to make links with people. What I've found over the past year is like, I can be talking to somebody about peace and security, and then they can put me in contact with somebody else who is looking for help with something, and then I will help them to write a speech or whatever, and then they'll put me in contact with somebody else. And it's like, something I've found is that everybody knows everybody. Like, even if you don't know them from having spoken to them, you know of them. So it's great to kind of drop names even if you haven't spoken to them directly. Just be bold about it. You know, this is your career. You're not going to get anywhere by being shy. You just have to be balchy and get out there. And that was actually something that Minister Simon Coveney told me when I started as the UN Youth Delegate. He told us to be balchy. So yeah, that's just what you have to do. Put yourself out there and don't be shy.
Great one. Thank you so much, Deirdre. Do you guys have any final notes, final sentences to say to everyone who's watching today before we close off?
Persistence is really important. I think everything that Amy and Gabriel and Deandra have been saying is so valuable, and bring persistence. And the important thing, and Gabriel, what you said there, but you know, you might look at it as some type of volunteering or some 3-month contract or something that might not look attractive. It's not where you want to be, but it's one of a series of 4 or 5 or 6 steps that are leading you there. So it's to be flexible and to be adaptable and be willing to see the value, be imaginative and curious and really look at opportunities, be willing to see the value of each one, because anything in this area, it is a series of stepping stones. It's you're building your way through skills and contacts and network and knowledge and experience and all that you're building your way towards your career.
Absolutely. I think every advice that's given today is super important. So this is going to be saved in our YouTube channel. So please go back and take the notes and go after it. I think this is super useful. I'm pretty sure that you will get something out of this after today. Those advices are really hands-on things that can be done immediately, actually. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the great questions. It's really helped us through going through get all those important phases highlighted. With this, I would like to ask our speakers. I would like to say thank you to all of our speakers. It's been an insightful panel discussion with lots of tips and tricks. I hope this was helpful for people who are listening today. We're ending our panel. Thanks for everyone who's watching today with us. As a closing mark, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to keep up with the future events. Thank you so much. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.